Center on Adaptation, and I am delighted to welcome all of you to the Pacific Youth Adaptation Forum. The Global Center on Adaptation is an international organization that works as a solution broker, and young people are crucial for our work. The Youth Leadership Program aims to make young people central to driving the adaptation agenda. In 2020, the Global Center on Adaptation established the Youth Adaptation Network, and today we have members in over 100 countries. Also, last year, the GCA established the Youth Advisory Panel to provide strategic advice about how youth can support the adaptation agenda. The panel is integrated by 12 members from all over the world. And the Youth Advisory Panel suggested organizing youth adaptation forums, bringing young people, international organizations, youth organizations, and global experts to discuss about the global goal on adaptation, but as well to showcasing youth adaptation solutions. Today, we have a very exciting agenda where you will have the possibility to provide your ideas and recommendations about how a climate resilient region in the Pacific could look like and what are these priority actions for a transformational change. Youth are not the leaders of tomorrow. Youth are the leaders of today. And we have an exciting agenda. I want to introduce two of the members of the Youth Advisory Panel who have been organizing and preparing everything for this panel. I have Mikhil Prasad from Australia, and she's working with the Red Cross, and Mikhil Prasad from Fiji, who had been engaged in several international processes related to climate change. Thank you to both of you for taking the leadership to organize this event, and also welcome to all our speakers and participants that have joined this forum from all the Pacific region, but also we have participants from all over the world. Without any other introduction, I want to hand over to Haley to start with the Intergenerational Dialogue. But before that, we have a message from the CEO of the Global Center on Adaptation, Professor Patrick Verkooyen. Then let's watch the video.
Dear adaptation champions, welcome to this Pacific Youth Adaptation Forum. No discussion on adapting to the global impacts of climate change is complete without considering the impacts on communities in the Pacific. And no discussion on creating a sustainable future for the Pacific can be complete without engaging with young people. This is why I'm honored to be addressing this Pacific Youth Adaptation Forum. And as a solutions broker for adaptation action, the Global Center on Adaptation, or GCA, is placing young people's perspectives and priorities at the heart of our work. Through our Youth Adaptation Network, we are connecting and empowering young people to make the case for adaptation, like through today's event and this series contributing to the discussions on the global goal on adaptation and building
the video twice
in Egypt later this year. Today's discussion, though, is an integral part of a series of youth adaptation forums that is engaging young people from around the world. The forums will ensure your voices are heard as part of global debates, such as the Global Goal on Adaptation, and also harness the power of young people as actors and agents of change. Because when I speak to young people about climate change, whether here in the Netherlands, Africa, or when I was last visiting the Pacific region in the Marshall Islands, one thing is always very, very clear. They don't want just to stand on the sidelines. They want to be involved and driving the change in building a more sustainable, more resilient future. That is why GCA is creating the adaptation jobs of the future and supporting youth-led businesses, such as through our Youth Adapt program. Let me give you one example. The Youth Adapt Challenge, which we're running in Africa. This unprecedented initiative to inspire and support youth-led adaptation solutions across the African continent more than half owned by women, is supporting projects run by businesses such as hydroponic millet fodders for smallholder farmers in Zambia, drought-resistant seedlings in Kenya, and drones to reduce flooding in Cameroon. And we're also working with our multilateral development bank partners to ensure adaptation jobs are mainstreamed into various country projects with a 30% target rate of adaptation jobs created. These actions need to be scaled up and expanded globally, and GCA is already actively engaging with our partners to expand these initiatives to support communities and young people in the Pacific. Because, as you know, the recent IPCC report showed just how vulnerable small island development status are to rising sea levels and more extreme weather. Yet, solutions exist and adaptation is possible. So the world needs your ambition, needs your energy, and needs your entrepreneurial spirit. This is why your work is so important and why it is vital that we hear your perspectives and priorities today. With that, I want to thank Mikhil and Haley, members of my Youth Advisory Panel, for organizing this session. I wish you all the best in your deliberations and look forward to working with you all and taking forward its outcomes. Thank you very much.
And now we are going to move to the next part of this Youth Adaptation Forum. We have the Intergenerational Dialogue that bring together young people and decision makers. And I want to hand over to one of the members of the Youth Advisory Panel, in this case, Haley. Haley, thank you for your leadership, for your hard work, for putting together this Youth Adaptation Forum. And now, please guide us in this process about listening. What are these priorities of youth regarding the global goal on adaptation? Over to you, Haley.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today. So as Patrick outlined just then in the lovely video, we are really pushing towards including youth in a meaningful way in the adaptation agenda. So we're organising these forums across the entire Pacific area and also across the world for young people to have meaningful conversations with decision makers, and in a way that will allow them to have a real say and their voices heard in adaptation. So one of the reasons that we're having this intergenerational dialogue is because in 2023, governments around the world will review the overall progress that has been made in achieving the global goal on adaptation. And it will also provide recommendations to accelerate the implementation during a global stocktake. But before I switch over to our lovely panelists, I'd just like to do a quick acknowledgement of country. This is something that we do regularly in Australia before we start a meeting, just to acknowledge the lands on which we are meeting. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the various lands on which we're meeting today. So for me, this is the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nations here, the First Peoples of Australia. And I'd like to extend that to anybody that's joining us on call today from across the country and across the region as well. So we have 4 wonderful panelists joining us today. So we have the lovely Krishnil, Nikhil, Solomon, and Ely. So I'll leave them each to take the chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion about some key questions about adaptation. So I'd like to invite Krishnil up first, if you'd like to give us a little bit of an overview about your work in this space.
Thank you. Ms. Mbulavinaka from Fiji. My name is Krishna Narayan. As I've been introduced, I'm a climate change consultant based in Fiji. I'm the executive director of Sustainable Future Consultancy, and I work in sustainable development and climate change policy development and implementation in the Pacific region. So I work as an advisor to various governments, development agencies, diplomatic missions, and regional organizations, trying to develop climate change policies in the region, in linking it with the Paris Agreement and how to implement locally at national level and across the region as well. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm not a youth anymore, but my beginnings, my humble beginnings in climate action was as a youth advocate, and then I transitioned to being part of the Fiji government delegations at COP processes and negotiating on loss and damage and adaptation in the Paris Agreement. And now I work with different development agencies to translate the Paris Agreement requirements and its implementations across the Pacific region.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And next I'll ask Mr. Solomon if you would come on and tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Hello, Kata. My name is Solomon Yeo. I am from the Solomon Islands, but I'm currently in Fiji. At the moment, I am the campaign director of this youth-led organization known as the Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change. We are a group of youth-led organization that currently campaigning alongside with civil society in the Pacific, as well as to support the efforts of the Vanuatu government to seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on climate change. That's all from me. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And now I'll switch over to my wonderful colleague, Mikhil.
Bulavanaka, hello everyone. My name is Mikhil Prasad. I'm from Fiji. I have been involved within the climate change space for the past 5 years now. I am going to start my Master's of Science specializing in climate simulation at the University of Southern Queensland this year. And I am also part of the Youth Advisory Panel for GCA. So thank you.
Lovely, lovely, thank you. And now we'll just move on to our final panelist, which is Ellie. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, by the way.
Thank you very much. You pronounced it very well. My name is Ellie van Vliet. I am Honorary Consul of Vanuatu in the Netherlands, and I'm part of the team that is advocating for an advisory opinion at the Icj on climate change. Well, that's for now. I can tell more maybe a little bit later in the forum. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you all so much. So to start us off, this question might be more geared towards yourself, Krishnil and Ellie, but I really welcome contributions from our youth members, Solomon and Nikhil as well. But I'm interested in asking your thoughts on what governments can do to ensure that youth are included in adaptation policy making and action. So would either of you like to start with a response on that one? Feel free to jump in.
Well, I guess I'll begin then. I think governments can be more considerate around the views of young people in the process of policy making spaces. So consulting with youth while they're making their policy drafts or decisions. Many governments in the Pacific usually consult various stakeholders when they have drafted a policy framework. And those drafts are consulted with various UN agencies, various diplomatic missions, funding agencies. But very often we see that young people are missing in that space. So this is where governments can connect more with young people and ensure that there is representation in the room. But I like to highlight that it's not only being represented, being part of the whole process as well, as part of the discussion and meaningfully engaging and contributing to the drafting process, providing comments, and ensuring that their views, their opinions are considered as part of the national processes. So I'm over to Vanuatu, I guess, to add on.
Did anybody else want to jump in on that one at all? I thought that was some really interesting comments you had there, especially around the role of governments really pushing to have meaningful youth inclusion, as opposed to just having youth present in the room, because there's something quite different about having it being meaningful and being more what we consider to be a little bit tokenistic at times. I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Nikhil or Solomon, with your experience as a young person engaging across those spaces.
Yeah, thanks, Haley, definitely. As we all know, like, young people have no doubt shown their motivation and passion, and they have amplified the roles that they play. And this is a very central part to global climate responses. So in my opinion, I also feel that what governments can actually do is allow more youth inclusive approach to their policy development programs, as Krishnil has also stated. And this can be best propagated in terms of mediums to support youths and their efforts towards a more climate resilient society. One way this can be implemented is probably through funding allocation. For instance, allocated national climate finance for youth groups to support their work, and by involving youths in decision-making and other consultation processes, which we all know is crucially vital, especially if we consider ourselves as leaders of the present generation. So this is one of the ways we can actually incorporate our thoughts, opinions, and values for policy-making processes. Maybe Solomon would want to add on to that as well.
Thank you, Nikhil, and the others as well. I think this raises a very, very interesting question that is really dear to heart as well, as a young person straight out of university, straight into civil society and working on the ground. As a youth is really quite been, it's a bit of a challenge, especially if you're a youth trying to advocate for social issues in the global south. I'm sure that many of our colleagues here will understand this, that the fact that there are existing barriers that really hinders young people to participate effectively and meaningfully in these spaces. So for example, I'm one of the fortunate people of my country in Solomon Islands who were able to get a degree from the university, and come back with that understanding. I'll be able to, at least to a level, contribute towards policymaking in my background in law. But there's many other youth that are not able to do that. And because of that barrier, that also is one of the barriers that really prevents people from going into sitting in the places where the table that where we make the key influencing. And just recently, actually, in Solomon Islands, we just had climate action networks that are setting up. And this is you imagine so many years past, what have been there? What are the networks that are there that are able to bring in youths that are not able to be fortunate enough to get a degree from a university or proper education. So young people, also part of the climate networks, they also share in that space, share their thoughts, and within that network, we amplify their voices in documents that we forward as a collective from the networks as a key policy demands from leaders. And of course, in the network, from the voices of young people, we improve that in a way that it fits in the language of the government, so the government can understand. So in a way, we are not speaking on behalf of the youth, but we're bringing the youth in a safe space so that we really encourage them to speak out on what particular issues they want, and then hopefully we get that down, and then we transform into the language of the government so that it can fit well in the decision-making process. As we all know, it's quite complex, and it's not easy for young people to really directly ask their government to do something. So this is one way I see that how climate action networks setting up in the Pacific has been quite influential in shaping policy and decision-making around climate, especially in this case, climate adaptation. It becomes more important for young people to get involved, because part of adaptation also is climate mobility, where people have to be forced to move from their lands, to relocate, or even displaced, or even forced to be displaced from their original point to another place. So in that sense, how are young people's voices being heard in the terms of the before moving, during moving, and after moving as well? So this reflected, and how can we encourage more young people to contribute to these spaces? So I think that's very important. I would like to contribute to that.
Wow, thank you so much. I especially love your work on bringing in young people who aren't traditionally involved in such spaces. It's quite a challenge that we talk about more and more, and we've talked about recently on our youth advisory panel for GCA, that often it's the same voices of young people that are speaking at these forums, that are engaging in climate dialogues. Even ourselves on the GCA Youth Advisory panel, we are all people that have already been quite actively involved. So it's really awesome to see that you're working on something like that, and also to build in that language that works with government, because sometimes I think we get quite passionate that we don't have the time or the expertise to build into that. So that's really wonderful. So yeah, I just wanted to check if there's anything you wanted to add into that question at all, Ellie.
Yeah, I would like to add something. Of course, I'm the old one here in the forum, and I see all the young people. I've been working all my life with young people very passionately. I really love that. I've been a mentor for a lot of young people, and my advice for this is use the democratic process in the country where you live. Be part of the political party. Why not? I mean, you can ask the government to do things, but you can also, I think that's wise to do, by the way. I think that's very, very useful. But you can, in the same time, also start finding political parties that are really passionate about advocating for the youth, about climate change, about climate adaptation, about anything that is that we're talking about today. And try to be part of those parties. Why not? I mean, you don't have to be old to be a political spokesperson on this subject. So I see a lot of talentful people also around here. I saw the list of people. So they're beautiful, talented people. Use your talents. Don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated by the old people. Just do it. That's my advice.
That's perfect. I really like that advice. Just get yourself in the political process. We actually have an election coming up in May in Australia that's going to be very interesting, and a lot of young people are really getting actively involved, which is wonderful to see. So I might move on to our next question. So this one I might switch over to Nikhil and Solomon first, if you'd like to answer. But I really wanted to ask, what do you think are priorities for young people in the Pacific when we're thinking about adaptation? So is there anything in particular that kind of stands out to you that you think action should be taken on in terms of adaptation in the Pacific region? If anyone wants to jump in, feel free.
I think I'll let Solomon go first.
Nominated.
Well, thank you. Perhaps you can go first next time. I'll take this one. Thank you. All right. Look, when we are doing a final year law degree at the University of South Pacific, a couple of my colleagues who are doing the same course together, we thought about it, like climate change, right? What are the efforts that currently being done in the Pacific? We do mangrove replantations to prevent further shoreline loss and further ecosystem destruction. We planned coral replantation to ensure that we have better barriers of reef to protect ourselves from sea level rise, as well as more coastal erosions. We plant sea walls so that we can prevent sea level rise to come in. But all of this somehow is just band-aid solutions, you know? It's just something that to slow down the issue of the full destruction that is happening in the Pacific. It's very important. I'm not downplaying the importance of this work, but the smoke that really started this fire did not come from our islands. It come from far, far away. And then this is the place that you really need to go and address it from the source. So this is the understanding that young people have in the Pacific back in our final year of law studies. We thought that, look, let's do something serious. Let's find solutions that we really can address it from this source that everyone been talking about. And how can we use international legal mechanisms out there in the world to really catalyze more ambitious actions, that, as we're seeing very disappointingly, how the global climate progress is going at a very glacial pace at the moment. So we come across this research of seeking to seek a United Nations General Assembly resolution to take climate change and human rights to the International Court of Justice justice. So this is one particular way we thought that it might be some ways that we can, although it's not a silver bullet, it something that we can bring to the table to accelerate more climate actions and hopefully to inspire more progress, especially in UNFCCC negotiations, but as well as in courts and tribunals all across the world, to encourage the governments that you do have an obligation to protect the rights of the current and future generation from the adverse effects of climate change. And this is the work that we've been focusing very much on in terms of scaling up efforts to address adaptation in the Pacific as well as elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, wow, fantastic. And I think that's a very important point to remember, especially with myself coming from Australia, one of the biggest emitters, and speaking to a lot of you from the Pacific as well. It's really important that we remember that going in our discussions. I don't know if you wanted to jump in at all, Nikhil.
Solomon pretty much covered quite intensively, and I absolutely agree with what he said. Just to add on to that, I would also like to just share one more thought. I think inclusion is one thing that is very much required. And that is a bit of a challenge that especially Pacific youths have. Let's say, for instance, Solomon mentioned about being part of international platforms such as UNFCCC. COP processes is a place where we can actually share our thoughts and amplify Pacific youth voices. But one challenge that we might have is probably in terms of accreditation, funding, or basically representing ourselves there. And that is one thing that we really need to work for. And that's probably one of the priorities that I think Pacific Leaders is working towards and fighting for. Yeah, so that's just one thing that I wanted to add. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I'm just conscious of time, so I might just ask one final question before we move on to a quick video from somebody that I was meant to show at the start of this session, but I forgot. So we'll do that at the end briefly. But I just wanted to ask everyone if you could just answer in maybe a quick, short, snappy summary of why you think it is important that young people are empowered to have a voice in the adaptation agenda. So maybe if Krishnil, if you'd like to go first again on that one. Sorry to throw you in the deep end there.
Sure. A couple of points, I guess, as I'm listening in, and I know we're short on time, but I will try to be brief. It's important that young people are participating in the discussions around climate action and adaptation. I've just been talking to different Fiji and other Pacific Island countries over the past week or so, and there's so many challenges that our countries are facing in terms of adaptation. While international advocacy is important and taking polluters to task and to court is important, and advocacy at UNFCCC process is important, it's often forgotten that we need to look inwards within our own countries and see where we can help our own countries, our Pacific Island countries who are struggling to adapt, and see where youth could fit in to find solutions in collaboration with our government officials, government partners, and other development agencies who are working and trying to find a solution. There's often a lot of gaps. One thing that our Pacific Island youth miss is trying to learn what the situation is within the country, and to learn where the gaps are and try to fit in where the gaps are. So what I mean is, like, if you identify where the gaps are, this is where you could try and help find a solution for when taking our climate agenda forward. And something which our Pacific youth lack is their own initiative to learn about the processes, to learn about the topic and the issues too, so that they're able to get involved. It's not all about governments. I have been a youth advocate for 12 years, trying to provide a space for young Pacific leaders to bring their voices into decision-making spaces. So I'm talking from experience. It's not just about always pointing fingers at the governments and what governments can do. The responsibility is also on youth of the Pacific. I've seen youth getting selected to go to COPs, and when they come back, they do nothing. So that experience, that acknowledge and that opportunity that they have been given at COP and any of the CCC processes, to learn from those processes, come back and try to help our countries address those challenges that we're facing, they're not doing that. So it's a wasted opportunity for many young people. It's just a travel opportunity, a free trip to go up aboard and then come back and do nothing. This is a challenge, a serious gap within young people that we see. I've noticed quite a bit within the Pacific region. So the challenge I put to our Pacific youth listening is that you need to step up and learn what adaptation means, what global, how many of you really know what global goal on adaptation is really, based out of the agreement that came out from COP26. It's a lengthy document. Do you know how to translate that into what it means for Fiji, for other Pacific Island countries, for Tuvalu, Vanuatu? What does this mean? It's not an easy process. Some people get very frustrated because they don't understand and they go out of this process and not engage. And this is not how we will solve the climate challenges of the Pacific. So if you really want to be part of the global agenda on adaptation, be part of the COP processes and meaningfully engage, learn about what these issues are and meet with your policymakers, meet with government officials and see where you fit in. The responsibility is not just on the governments, it's on you as well. So I leave it at that.
Thank you. That's a really powerful statement, I think, as well, to kind of bridge that gap. And that's why it's so useful for us to have this intergenerational panel. And we do get quite in our bubbles and silos sometimes. So I think it's really useful to have that insight. And it builds off what Ellie was saying before about getting involved in your political process. We've got just about a minute left on this panel section. I just wanted to check, Ellie, or if one of our lovely youth members wanted to jump in with any final comments there.
Can I say something about it? Yeah. Well, I think it's a very strong statement by Krishnel. I think I can understand it. But on the other side, it can be so intimidating, all this information, all the big action worldwide, and then you come back to your own small country. You have to challenge maybe your local politicians, your local government, and then you can maybe forget or get your passion is not being reflected in the people that you meet. So maybe it's also for the Pacific Forum Adaptation Forum to help or to find ways to maybe choose one or two actions. Maybe not to change the whole world, but try to find a few actions and try to help people to fulfill that. Because otherwise it might be too big and people lose their faith in that they can change anything. But I strongly believe that young people can change a lot. There's so many talents. So that's more the thing, make it smaller, start big and make it smaller and choose a few things to fulfill, to reach your goal and choose the next goal. But it's easy said, it's not easy done, but it can be done, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think it can get very overwhelming too. So having those small goals can be really useful. I'll switch over to Solomon now.
Yeah, just would like to add on to the points that's been raised. I think before I concur with Krishnel, because some young people, as well as participating in as well as involving in the area, sometimes can be quite challenging when you understand all of these issues. Like young people, we can know so much about, what are the opportunities that we have to go out every year to international conferences, right? To learn about all the process. Even I have attended COP two times now, COP25, COP26. Still, I'm still struggling to understand the whole UNFCCC processes. It's really challenging to be honest, as a young person. If you want to really know, you have to be involved in so many in the past, or at least spend most of your year just reading and trying to understand all of it, right? So, I mean, as young people in the Pacific, this is not it is a barrier, to be honest, in terms of how young people can invest their time in understanding what this really means. And I would like to raise also the understanding of climate change within our countries. I don't know, maybe I'm speaking generally here, but for the country that I come from in Solomon Islands, when you go to the communities and you talk about climate change, people will say sea level rise. But climate change is more than sea level rise. It's intersectional. How do you say this word? Yes, it's cross-cutting. You know, it goes across every issues that we have out there. It's women's rights. It's water and sanitation. It's all sort of things. It's even health. So many things are happening that people don't understand. It's just the tip of the iceberg that they see that it's sea level rise, but it's more than that. So there needs to be more understanding of people about more awareness raised in this in our own islands, to be honest. And the fact that the concepts that we're bringing into, like loss and damage, climate change, adaptation, people in communities don't really understand what this term and concepts mean, and how do you explain that to them? You know, like, did you put a picture of a factory emitting smokes, and then you see melting ice caps that people have never seen in their lives or even understand that? It's really hard for them to understand this. So I think that young people has an opportunity in this area, that young people understanding, especially local young people, you know, respective countries, coming back and really try to socialize this towards their communities to get them to understand using analogies and try to educate them on many other materials that they bring from their own studies. I think that's one way we can give back to our communities in understanding this geopolitical problem. Another thing is the gaps in the countries, as Krishnil has highlighted. There's a lot of gaps that are remaining, especially on adaptation. One thing that is ongoing around the Pacific is the policy development of relocation guidelines. That is in many countries. Fiji has done this, Solomon Islands in the process, Cook Island, as well as many others. And they're also developing a regional framework on climate mobility. Now, how can youth fit in this? And that's the big question mark I will end this question with. It would be great to you guys to propose some suggestions and answers as well. It's not us coming out with suggestions, but we also would like to welcome how can young people involve in this deeply concerning and very important processes, especially when you're talking about our future, where we have to move somewhere, not externally mostly, but internally. Where would we move to different places in our countries, and how can young people thrive in those areas? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Solomon. That was incredibly insightful, and I think a really important reminder that we need to consider the intersectional nature of climate impacts and how we can address those as well. And it's actually a perfect question that you've ended us on, as we're going to be moving into our youth showcase section next, where we look at how some incredible young people have been adapting to climate change. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much to Krishnil, Ellie, Nikhil, and Solomon for your time today. It's been wonderful hearing from your various expertise, and we really appreciate you coming along. It's been invaluable for me, and I'm sure for everyone on the Zoom and watching the live streams as well. And before we move on to the showcase, we actually have a video that we have from Mr. Yusuf Nassif, and he is the Director of Adaptation for UNFCCC. So we'll just briefly show that now, and then I will pass over to Nikhil to take the next section. Thank you.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I'm very happy to be addressing the youth constituency on climate change and on the specific issue of adaptation and on what the global goal on adaptation should entail. Now, at the outset, allow me to apologize on behalf of all adults for the situation that we and our predecessors over the past 200 years have put the youth in this strange situation where you are the first generation to endure the impacts of climate change, but yet the last generation to be able to solve the problem. And you may recall that the science made its mark in 2018 with the IPCC report on the 1.5 by giving us a very short window of action where we have to transform the way we do our business in order to be able to retain what we consider to be a prosperous life or an acceptable life. And we are now in peril of even extinction. Now, how can you help, and how can the climate process help with visioning such a desirable future where we do not have to worry about climate change perils or other ecological disasters, and on the contrary, move into an abundant, sustainable environment and mindset? Now, you know that our negotiating process has identified goals for mitigation well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5. We have objectives for funding, the 100 billion, and there would be a new number for 2025. And we are still to articulate what kind of vision we want for adaptation and resilience. And this is really important for us to now get the input from the main stakeholders of the future, the youth. What is it that you would like to see in terms of a future mindset that would prioritize resilience, that would prioritize sustainability? It's not just a climate change thing. It's climate change and biodiversity and nature stewardship and equity across the world. How can we do that? We'd like to know how you would define the tenets of such a desirable future. Now, this also reflects what kinds of values do we want to instill in the world? What kind of learning would then make us depart from the standard educational system that prioritizes extractive economies at the expense of regenerative economies? And within the coming 2 years, we will have a work stream, the Global Goal on Adaptation, where we will have 8 different workshops where inputs from all external entities are welcome. And I look forward to the youth constituency presenting very strongly their own input, insights, aspirations, visions to help us take the right decisions internationally and nationally and subnationally to move our societies to that aspirational world that guarantees all these positive values that define what it means to be permanently sustainable, to be permanently resilient, to have moved towards that regenerative lifestyle to which we all aspire. Thank you very much.
Beautiful, thank you. So I'll now hand over to Nikhil, who will take us through the Showcasing Youth-Led Adaptation Solutions session. All right, over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you, Haley. All right, so now we're moving on to the next session, which is going to be the Showcasing Youth-Led Adaptation Solutions. Before we actually start, I would just like to play the video for our Youth Adapter winner, 2021, Mr. Yewande, who is from Nigeria. Ife, could you please just play?
Hi everyone, my name is Acknowledgement of Country, and I'm the CEO and also a co-founder at the brand Salubata. First, I have a bachelor's and master's degree in environmental toxicology and pollution management. I have a 5-year work experience as an environmental scientist. And here I am as a co-founder at Salubata. And at Salubata, we simply make shoes from recycled plastic waste.
Over 381 million tons of plastic wastes are produced annually. More people reuse plastics rather than recycle or upcycle them to reduce the volume. Approximately 90.5% of these wastes have never been recycled, which has resulted in over 5 trillion plastics still floating in their canals and oceans till date. Many of the downhill impacts of these pollutants also affect those in the underserved communities the most, especially the women. At Salubata, the mission is to invent lifestyle technologies that help people and the planet. The company is a team of shoe designers and environmental scientists that imagined if we could convert all these plastic wastes to footwears, making money and reducing waste simultaneously. Salubata has bootstrapped till date to reach 900 recurrent and paying customers, sold 1,400 shoes, and generated $150,000 in revenue.
Hi everyone. name is Icj Advisory.
Very impressive indeed. So now we're going to start off with the showcasing of the youth-led adaptation solutions. Before we ask each of our panelists to present their lovely and incredible work that they're doing in their communities, I think it would be great if we could ask each of them to just very quickly introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Miss Tiana first?
Awesome. I would just like to mirror Hayley's sentiment before by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, which is the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also extend my respect to any other First Nations peoples who might be speaking or joining us today. So I am based in Brisbane. I am at the University of Queensland and I'm doing my PhD in communication for social change. And I'm very passionate about communication, but particularly storytelling and the role that storytelling plays in promoting social change. I am also the founder of the Humanitarian Changemakers Network, which is a transmedia storytelling and education community that catalyses young Aussies to engage in the social change space. I think that's a good intro for me.
Incredible. Thank you very much. I think we can now ask Mr. Talua to just quickly introduce himself.
Sorry for that. Thank you, Nikhil. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're audible.
All right. I'm Talua Nivanga. I'm the co-founder of the Fulingafo New Transformation NGO, and also the current chairman of the organization right now. I will be studying law and environmental planning in the University of Waikato this year. And I'm currently working under the Tuvalu government, serving as under the Fisheries Department as the Fisheries Asset Officer, in which I am responsible for the management and monitoring of all fisheries assets of the fisheries assets. I guess that's a very brief introduction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hand it over to Ms. Vinzella to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Vinzella Nen. I come from Papua New Guinea. I am the founder of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance and PNG chapter, as well as that I am one of the leads in the PNG Climate Change Tribe Initiative in PNG. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinzella. So our last panelist, Ms. Waki, if you could just please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Waki from Vanuatu Red Cross Society in Sanmo branch. I'm the youth lead of YADAP in project in Bougainville. Firstly, I would like in Vanuatu. Second, I would like officer in HQ and Mrs. Shelley Johnson, our branch officer in Sanmo branch. Also, I would like to extend this acknowledgement to my team for the support they give me in putting together the presentation which I will be giving this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's start off with the showcasing of the youth-led adaptation solutions. Let's start with Miss Tiana. She's going to talk to us about the adaptation through transmedia storytelling. Over to you, Tiana.
Thank you. So I think I'll start by just kind of prefacing this with my belief that the role of storytelling cannot be overlooked, especially when it comes to something like climate change adaptation. As humans, we think in stories. We don't think in facts or figures or statistics. They might help us contextualize and make sense of things, but when we think about the future or when we think back to the past, we kind of imagine it as a series of stories playing out in our head. And, you know, as much as we want to think that we're logical beings that are really motivated by facts and figures and empirical evidence, at the end of the day, at our core, we're kind of biologically programmed to be motivated by stories and emotions. So I've spent the last year and a half of a lot of my PhD researching this idea of transmedia storytelling. And I really hope my supervisors don't see this because that actually has nothing to do with my PhD research project. But transmedia storytelling is something that we're kind of beginning to explore with the Humanitarian Changemakers Network. So we started with our online news and storytelling platform, The Changing Times. It started as a print and digital news platform. We're also in the process of launching a transmedia academic journal and a podcast network and a video storytelling platform, hopefully by the end of the year. Now, transmedia storytelling, first of all, is not the same as multimedia storytelling. Transmedia storytelling essentially takes an overarching narrative, or sometimes in pop culture, we see this as an overarching story world. And it's about telling individual stories that kind of stem from this in a way so that each story and each platform kind of tells its own unique story and gives the audience enough value on its own. But if it's consumed alongside the other stories, it also kind of adds something new and completely different and unique to this overarching story. A really quick example would be something like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? You could go and watch any of the Marvel movies on their own. They make total sense. You can get enough value out of that movie on its own. But if you really wanted to, you could dive deep into this rabbit hole. You could watch all of the films. You could read the comics. You could get into fan fiction, all of these things. And so they really kind of add more value. And transmedia storytelling traditionally hasn't really been used in the social change space, although when it has, it's kind of just been through journalism. And journalism typically is really unengaging for young people. It's really boring. And so what we're trying to do with the Humanitarian Changemakers Network is kind of trying to make a transmedia experience that young people will want to engage with, that will also promote social change. And a big thing that the media needs to do in order to promote social change is not only kind of engage young people, but get them to really participate it and turn them from these kind of like passive consumers of the media or the news to these really kind of active creators of stories and news. So beyond kind of just our regular news platform, our podcast, eventually our journal and whatnot, what we've decided to do is kind of create this transmedia storytelling project called The Climate Files. Now, it's kind of in beta mode. I'm kind of doing it all myself, and I'm not very good when it comes to like web development, but I'm trying my best. But what the Climate Files is it's essentially a transmedia speculative future experience. So it uses this idea of story making as well as storytelling to kind of imagine what possible futures might exist if we don't take urgent action to address and adapt to climate change. So when you enter the Climate Files, it's kind of set in the year 2050. And you have, as like the reader of the Climate Files, you've just been given access to these files. And what they are is a collection of evidence that was collected from changemakers across Australia and beyond between the years 2020 and 2050. So the types of evidence that's found in the Climate Files includes things like photos, news articles, personal stories, basically anything. And they all kind of set out to prove that despite our best efforts corporates, big corporations, governments, decision makers refuse to listen to young people and actually do enough to address the climate crisis. And so the files are organized in chronological order. And so it begins with the 2020s, and then there's the 2030s, 40s, eventually to 2050. And while the evidence from the 2030s to 2050s is kind of made up of speculative fiction pieces that suggest what the future might look like, which I think in and of itself is fascinating to think that in pop culture, there's this whole kind of subgenre in like film and literature called cli-fi, which like 5 or 10 years ago wasn't a thing. But now, people are starting to realize that the climate crisis is this huge part of our life. And it's interesting to see the way people are kind of starting to think about what the world might look like if we don't take action to address it. But the evidence in the climate files from the 2020s is actually kind of made up of real images, real stories, real resources, and real reports from young change makers around the world that kind of shows, I guess, real life evidence. So it's stepping away from this story making and really stepping into kind of storytelling. And it's letting young people kind of share their own stories, their own images that kind of shows what they're doing to address the climate crisis, how they're experiencing the climate crisis. And so we've kind of organized it in a way that people can not only kind of read all of these different things, but you can also upload your own files and documents. And I guess kind of the goal of this is not only creating a transmedia experience so that people from around the world can kind of see what other young people might be doing or kind of reflecting their lived experience, but actually making it so that people can use these. You can post photos of what's happening in your community, and a news outlet from anywhere in the world can kind of access that and actually share it. And it's kind of switching. I think media traditionally kind of takes a very like top-down approach, and it's turning this idea of like information sharing into a bottoms-up thing where we can really begin to kind of center the voices of those who are most affected by the issue and those who are really taking action on the issue by using their stories and their images and whatever in these kind of broader discussions that we're having about climate change. I might end there because that was very long, but thank you.
That was really impressive, Tiana. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we'll move on to Vinzela next. She's going to talk about her Sustainable Ocean Alliance work, I believe, and her activism work within the climate change and climate adaptation space.
Hi, everyone. So as an advocate, I've been in this space for roughly around 10 years, actively being involved with 350 Pacific and other youth run organizations within my country. And so far, as one of the leads within my country as an advocate, we've done tree planting campaigns as a way to sort of educate the local communities. The problem with PNG is that we don't have climate education integrated into our national curriculum from the bottom up. There's literally nothing. So basically, when we try to go out to do reforestation exercises, such as the one we did in 2019, we had to sort of educate communities about what's happening to the environment. I mean, they could see what was happening. However, they did not know what was happening. They probably thought that it was something that was seasonal, it was going to go and it was gonna affect us for a short while, but it's more than that. And I resonate very deeply with one of the speakers who mentioned that a lot of people, when they hear climate change, they think of sea level rise, when it's actually more than that. And in PNG, where the area is very geographically diverse, it's affected everyone from the highlands, high altitudes, all the way down to the coastal islands. So part of the work that I do is reforestation with the PNG Climate Change Tribe. So in 2019, a group of young people from Papua New Guinea, we decided to come together and sort of start a tree planting campaign where we went to the communities and spoke to them about climate change, the effects, and how reforestation was going to help in adaptation and to help local communities to better understand how they could help themselves in cases where the environment was affected. Apart from that, most of my work has been around the ocean, considering my work with Sustainable Ocean Alliance. We've done a lot of work around reef restoration projects. So reef restoration, we've done it in 2 local communities, and it's really good in a sense where the people know what's happening. They know that we're in trouble. They know that the ocean isn't supplying as much marine resources as it used to in the past. So that project, that educational platform that we provided for them to sort of help them understand how they could be able to better help their marine life as well as the ecosystems within their community. It was really good to see the communities understand and to help themselves. Apart from that, we've done programs for children as well. We've run awareness activities for kids to help them better understand. As I've mentioned, in PNG, we don't have climate education as a very strong part of our education system. So it's quite sad considering that we are part of the top 10 countries that are vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So we run programs for children, and we try to enforce this idea of advocacy through art. So we do art by the ocean. We've recently started an upcycling challenge for young people to sort of be able to make use of what comes out from waste being washed ashore, or even through dispersion. We've done beach cleanups and also community cleanups, because for Sustainable Ocean Alliance, we believe that it's not only what's along the coastline, but it can also be what's further from the ocean, because for countries like mine where we don't have proper waste management systems, it's very difficult for us to dispose of our rubbish properly. So then most of it eventually ends up in the ocean. So it's through programs like this that we encourage young people, we encourage youth groups to sort of come out of the shell to sort of help themselves economically, given that most of the ocean, the life in the ocean is dying out, but also to give them like another use for a waste, something that's considered waste, to give them ideas and to help them like continuously thinking about how they could help themselves and how they could help the people around them. And and beach cleanups and all that. And I believe that this is something for young people to constantly be engaged in, because young people, I've heard something about us always complaining about the government, always complaining about people without having to sort of contribute. And it's true, we're not given that space. And I feel that we have a lot of energy. When people say youth, there's always energy. We always think energy. And I believe that there's 2 things that come with energy. The first thing is that we're so full of energy that we try to drive away the older generation, when in fact we should all be working together. So most of the work that I've been doing, the lesson that I've learned is that I have not consulted my elders enough to know what the vision is, because older people, we have to admit it, they have most of the knowledge and they could help us go very far in this. So I feel that when it comes to running community projects and trying to run awareness exercises, I believe that it's very important that we all have to work together. So thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I might just, you're back. Sorry, Nikhil jumped off for a little while there. I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Vinzela. I'm really sorry. I dropped off for a few minutes and I had a bit of a crisis, but I'm back online. Thank you very much. I think moving on, I think we'll have Talua speaking about his coral restoration project, I believe. Would you like to go next?
Thank you, Nikhil. So today I have the privilege to and proud to be representing our very own youth-led association, Fulingafo, and also my beloved country, Tuvalu. Well, the Fulingafo is a youth-led organization with a compelling vision to strengthening the ability of the youth to engage in meaningful conversations that foster a unity of thought and vision, which accompanied with effective actions that can be nurtured among the youth in their endeavor of striving striving to build a better world for all. First, I would like to acknowledge the video from the CEO from his remarks, given that he pointed out the new IPCC report that was released in August 2021, which signifies a code red for humanity. Well, indeed, we all know that that if we fail to act urgently, there will be catastrophic global consequences, as he pointed out, and we already are nearing abrupt climate tipping points. Given the fact we have less than a decade to make a massive reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions, and if we don't, we will likely see global heating above 1.5 degrees Celsius and higher well within our lifetimes. This is very scary, as we all know. And we've seen the global carbon emissions and global heating trending upwards at an unprecedented rate for the last several decades. Our corals, the beautiful homes of our fish, our main food security, began to vanish. Indeed, it's clear that we are already paying for inaction on climate, and things could get much more worse. Yet, as the global heat maintains its trends upwards, the youths of Tuvalu, through the youth members of the Fulingafo organization, are also accelerating adaptation projects that benefits the vast population. One of which is our core restoration project that has been ongoing in the past years and was proudly funded by the Global Green Grants Fund and the Australian Embassy. The Coral Garden is a very new initiative in Tuvalu, introduced by a youth organization back in 2019. And by saying that, we, the youth members of the Fulingafo, decided not to overwhelm the Tuvaluan youth with so much information when introducing the program to them, the project to them, but to keep the project in its simplicity form. Therefore, delivering the project at the local level was also done the same, leaving the youth with we invite to join us with no excuse but to join us. But yeah, the most exciting part when we set out to plant the corals, that we always we always write invitation letters to all the youth organizations on the island to join us on the youth adaptation project. And this is something that we normally do every time we set out to do the activity. And what we've learned that when we invite, we send invitation letter for 2 representatives from each youth organization to join us, we always receive a request for an increased number for more than 10 or maybe less than 10, and which is something that we embrace the most, because knowing that the youths of Tuvalu are keen to unite in action of securing our future, and also join us in our core restoration project. But due to safety precautions, we always limit the number of youth below 60 to 7 in total when we set out to do the activity. Normally we spend the whole day to do the coral planting, and I'm taking 3 to 4 hours to do the coral planting. And the rest of the day, which is the most interesting part, we will pay a visit to one of the islets for a barbecue. Here, where we invite youths that we all invited to introduce themselves, so that we can all know each other. How can we collaborate? How can we work together? And how can we work together in the future, and so on. Given our vision is that to unite youths, so we're trying to create spaces and inviting youths how we can advance the project, and how can we work all together as Tuvaluan youths to secure the future of our next generation. I guess that's a very brief for what we are doing, and thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you very much, Talua. Very impressive work, and appreciate what you're doing on grassroots levels. Now we have our final speaker, but we're also running a bit tight on time. We have Samita from Red Cross Vanuatu talking about Youth Adapt Education Initiative. Samita, would you like to go now?
Okay, before I begin, I'm just going to switch off my camera because I'm having a problem with the. Could everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're audible. You're audible.
Okay. I started engage with youth and communities by the Wayada training, which I've attended last year in our HQ in Port Vila. And coming back to the branch, I train more youths, young youths like me, and then we implement the project in communities. There are some positive impacts of the project is we learn, we help communities and youths inside communities to know more about what climate change is, and we help them to see the importance of Wayada risks and impacts of climate change inside. Some of the challenges we face: weather is not stable. There's not the participants find it hard in communities. They find it hard to understand, but fortunately, the activities help them a lot to understand what climate change is and what the impacts and the risks inside their communities. Before we implement the project in a community, there are several processes which we must follow. Some agreements which is made with our local authorities, the signing of the MOUs with the provincial government and with the Luganville Municipal Council, and also for the community leaders, chiefs and youth reps, and yes, and also we have to consult with them for the agreement before we implement the project inside the communities. Some things I've learned when implementing the project is that I've come to know a lot more about what climate change is and its impact. And through this project of Wayada, it builds my capacity as a youth to facilitate any trainings in a big number of people. And also, I would like to say this in every youth participate right now, or everyone watching live stream, that sometimes tasks given to us youths, we find it difficult, but it's best and it's better if we seek advice from whoever is around us, and always seek assistance. Then they can help you facilitate any trainings or any project. And when you make mistakes, um, when correction is made, take it as a lesson learned for better improvement. And do not feel down of yourself. Be courageous and brave, and also work with a heart of humanity, and also have a heart of voluntary services. So before I'll close my presentation, we must always practice the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. We go green. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Smita. Thank you once again to all of our lovely panelists who shared their incredible and remarkable work. We really appreciate and admire the grassroots level work and the inspiring work that you're all doing in your local communities. I think I'll hand over back to my colleague, Haley, because she's going to take over the next session now, which is designing a climate resilient Pacific post 2030. It's going to be a very interesting interactive exercise. So over to you, Haley.
Thanks so much, Nikhil, and thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your insights and your work that you've been doing in the adaptation space. I'm blown away by just the sheer passion and expertise that we have in young people, and the real work that you're all doing on the ground to make a difference is honestly so inspiring. So thank you so much. So we're now going to move into the final 10 minutes, which are going to be a little bit of an interactive exercise for everybody that is watching the live stream, and for any of our speakers that want to get involved as well that are on the Zoom here with us. So basically, I'm going to invite you all to think about what a climate resilient Pacific will look like in a post-2030 world. And we're going to look at basically identifying some goals on what youth adaptation looks like, and sharing some priorities for the global goal on adaptation. So the really exciting thing is that these will be built into a document that we will compile from all of the regional youth adaptation forums, and they will be presented to the Global Centre on Adaptation during a Friends of GCA high-level decision maker event later this year. So if you could all follow the instructions on the screen here. So there's either a QR code that you can scan your phone, or if you go to www.menti.com and just enter the code that is up on the screen here, you should have a website that comes up, and then shortly we'll start through the exercise. So I'll get it up on my phone as well, and I'll hold it up if that is useful to anyone to see if they haven't used it before. But if you have any questions on how to use it, please feel free to throw those in the chat, and I'll do my best to help as well. Great. So when you get in, the screen should kind of look, oh, it's not showing because of my background, but basically once you get in, there should be a question that comes up straight away. And that question asks, what are your priorities for the global goal on adaptation? What are 5 actions that can enable transformational change in the Pacific? So I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to have a think about that, and we'll show some of those up on the screen as they're coming through as well. And please shout out as well if you're having any troubles accessing that. I might pop them in the chat as well. I'll just pop the code in the chat just in case anyone's having any problems while we move to sharing the screen with any answers coming through. All right, so as you can see on the screen, so when people press submit, their answers will start coming up and we can have a chat. And if there's anyone on the Zoom that wants to jump on and actually share some thoughts on this as well, feel free to. Any of our speakers, I know you had quite short slots to speak earlier, so if anyone wanted to jump on as well, you're more than welcome to. Oh, great. So I can see someone's popped through inclusion. Definitely something very important from what we've been talking about so far today. I think inclusion is incredibly important, not only for young people, but for just everyone in every aspect of society. I think a lot of the climate issues that we're facing now are a result of maybe not having that inclusion over the years. So that's really important. What have we got? Apply green response and go green. Certainly. I really like the reminder of the reuse, reduce, recycle, the green response. So incredibly important, so simple, but so effective, and something that all of us can do. And advocate to your government to support the resolution of Vanuatu to an advisory opinion on climate change. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that one, if anyone wanted to jump on who wrote that and share a little bit more about it. If not, that's okay as well. But it's a very great concrete action.
You want me to say something about it, Haley?
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to.
Well, maybe not everybody is familiar with the International Court of Justice. It's in The Hague. It's actually in the Peace Palace. And it's a very important court. It doesn't actually give a punishment or whatever, but it is a court that is from the UN. So all countries that are part of the UN are also part of the ICJ. And it gives advices on very important topics. They did in the past, for instance, on apartheid, on how you what the definition is. And I will read you just one small line about the ICJ Advisory Opinion. An ICJ Advisory Opinion could set out in well-defined and legally actionable terms the relevant duties of states to protect present and future generations from climate-induced harms, while ensuring that their responses to climate change take all relevant international obligations into consideration. So it gives a legal framework that all countries, part of the UN, if being accepted, that all parties of the UN can use for their local laws. So it can become really powerful once it's being accepted. And it is really for all countries, not only for Pacific countries, also for all countries in the world. We believe it's a very important advisory opinion. It could
Definitely.
I think it will set a next level of discussion on climate change and climate adaptation and who needs to do what. So that's why we feel it's really important that this step is being taken. A lot of countries already have endorsed it, like the Caribbean countries of the CARICOM. But of course, we need half of the UN countries to vote for it. So every country that can vote for it is really important for all of us.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Thank you. That's really useful for you sharing. Thank you so much. I didn't actually know that much about it myself, so I've just learned something new there. I can see Effie has popped some further information about the youth-led campaign in the chat as well. Thanks for sharing that, Ellie. And then I'll just pop on, have a look. So, yep, to amplify the Pacific voice and ensure meaningful adaptation mechanisms are incorporated. I think that's really important. And looking at those local levels, we often focus on the larger level, so that is definitely useful. Awareness and education are critical, of course. We've got some great ones coming through now. Youth engaging with their climate change ministry department to feed into the organization. Perfect. That's so important for Carver. Nice. Very good. I love that. And then investigating traditional adaptation practices, cases in the Pacific region where communities have resorted to using traditional conservation methods. I think that is incredibly important, and it's something that should be front and center, and it's something that Australia is slowly but surely starting to recognize as well, especially after the horrific bushfires we had, really realizing that those First Nations methods of caring for the land would have basically stopped us from being in a situation that we're in now. So wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And funding, definitely coordination and cohesion. Definitely. Yeah, and I think translating the climate information and services is 100% essential as well. So we might just flip over to the next slide. And then the next question should come up for everyone as well. And I do apologize, we're quite close to the finish time. We might go just a little bit over, but feel free to jump off if you need to as well, but we shouldn't take too much longer over the finish time. So the next question is, what does a climate, what does a climate resilient Pacific post 2030 look like? Oh, no, not a problem at all. Thank you so much to all of the wonderful Vanuatu team for coming on and supporting Sumita today. I really appreciate it. And I know you have quite a intense COVID outbreak there at the moment and your team is very busy. So I really appreciate your time today coming on. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much. So yeah, this question is all about being a little bit idealist. So you can have those big pictures, the exciting things. What does your ideal Pacific look like, basically? I'll just give everyone a minute or so to write those up and I'll have a quick read through. All right, I've got my first one come through. Local-led equity, definitely essential, very similar to the first, with inclusion, diversity, and no coal. Perfect. Free of fossil fuels, yep, perfect. Leading on from the other answer, I've got a little bit of a common theme coming through here already. I'll just give it a little bit longer. I know this one can be quite inventive in ideas as well. And this is our last question for this session as well. So feel free to write as much as you want. I know there's a character limit on how much you can write, so feel free to add anything into the chat as well if you'd like. All countries have implemented measures of adaptation on climate change. Funding for these measures are available for all countries, definitely. That's so essential, I think. And I think that ties in really well to the idea of equity and local-led solutions, making sure that those measures are fair in the way that they're funded as well. Global temperature is still below 1.5 degrees Celsius. My goodness, yes. Let's hope that is what the Pacific looks like post-2030. Still holding on to that. And empowerment of the people to appreciate their environment. I think that's a really beautiful sentiment as well. I think, especially in countries like Australia, there's been a loss of that connection to the environment. So it's incredibly important. A Pacific where natives decide over their future, 100%. So essential to the future, I think, as well. And especially with sea level rise and potential future climate migration, absolutely essential. Young people being trusted and given the freedom and the resources to be disruptive, creative, and truly innovative in implementing solutions to adapt to climate change or any future challenges that humanity faces. That is perfect. I think that sums up really well what everyone's kind of spoken about today, just that young people are skilled. They're not just the climate activists on the side yelling. They do have the capacity to be within those decision-making roles and in those innovative roles making that change. It's really important as well. And we've seen from speakers there is that dual responsibility to not only be the activist, but to also step up and go into the political process or go into those positions and fight as you can, although there are those barriers as well that do stop that. So it's such a complex process, but I think everyone that has been involved in this call specifically have been doing an incredible job. And then a Pacific where our cultures are kept alive despite the migration and sea level rise. Exactly. 100%. There's so much work to be done in that space. So I'm just conscious of the time. We're just past 7 o'clock. So I think we'll wrap up on the Mentimeter questions there. Feel free to keep answering them in once we get out of the slides, but thank you all so much for that. It'll be really useful. And like I said, those answers will be fed into a report that will be going to the Global Centre of Adaptation and feeding into the Global Goal on Adaptation. So if you have any other thoughts, please feel free to share them in the chat. Feel free to email us and also to come along to our future adaptation youth panel sessions as well. I will pass on over to Adriana, who will take us through the closing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haley, and to all the contributions. And now I would like to show a video of the COP27 presidency that this year is hosted by Egypt. Then let's watch this video.
Distinguished participants, colleagues, friends, and inspiring young people. I'm pleased to speak to you today on behalf of Egypt's incoming presidency of COP27, taking place next November in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Let me at the outset thank and congratulate Global Center on Adaptation. We were thrilled to learn that GCA is putting together a series of youth-focused adaptation dialogues. We are further thrilled that these dialogues is starting from Africa and is being held on the sidelines of the World Water Forum taking place at Dakar, Senegal. Distinguished participants, I'm talking to you after a few weeks from the release of the 6th Assessment IPCC Working Group 2 report on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerabilities. The message is very clear, and there's an endless list of reasons about why do we need to feel alarmed and deeply concerned. Adverse impacts of climate change are already here and cumulatively increasing in all regions and across all sectors. Africa is among the most affected, including in vital areas such as access to water. Some progress is made on adaptation, but it is furthest from enough. Time is running out, resources mobilized are dismal, and adaptation limits are fast approaching. The bigger picture would be more visible with Working Group 3 in April, and many other important engagements such as the UN Oceans Conference in Lisbon. Sharm el-Sheikh is expected to be the cup of implementation. Adaptation should be at the heart of implementation discourse and action. The 2 years Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on global goal and adaptation was launched and will go through a series of policy and technical discussions. Many voices are calling for seeing a qualitative accomplishment on the GGA discussion in Sharm el-Sheikh before the conclusion of its process in UAE in 2023. We look forward for your valuable engagements, inputs, and submissions on the road towards a GGA that captures your concerns, priorities, and challenges, and showcase the best practices of youth-led global and local resilience solutions. Meanwhile, it is imperative to continue to demand a sufficient, meaningful, accessible, predictable, and balanced climate finance for adaptation. The 50-50 mitigation adaptation climate finance must not be a theoretical construct, and doubling the double should be honored and sustained. As COP27 presidency, we commit ourselves to a science-based, balanced, transparent, and inclusive leadership that promotes equitable progress on all fronts and encourages a drive for additional ambition and strengthened resilience. In addition, the momentum created in Glasgow needs to be maintained and geared towards implementation. Our objectives and vision will greatly benefit from the inputs from and engagement with all stakeholders. And as a country with extended commitment to youth empowerment, and as an annual host of the World Youth Forum in the same city of Sharm el-Sheikh, we strive to ensure that youth are at the heart of the conversation. As key contributors to policy planning and implementation, as well as being most affected by the future impact of the decisions we make today. For these reasons, we are very glad that COP26 mandated an annual youth-led forum starting from Sharm el-Sheikh in cooperation with Yongo and UFCCC Secretariat. Egypt aspires that this forum and the COP itself provide a conducive environment for you to network, disseminate, impart and receive knowledge, speak up and exert the right level of pressure on governments and all stakeholders. I say this while looking forward to recurrent and dynamic conversations with you before, during, and after Sharm el-Sheikh. I thank you. Distinguished.
Thank you very much. And now we are coming to the end of the Pacific Youth Adaptation Forum. I would like to say thank you to the two facilitators, Haley and Mikhil. Thank you for your leadership, for your hard work, for putting together this forum. Also to all the speakers, what you are doing is really important. We are living in a climate crisis, but we have a unique opportunity to build together a climate resilient world. This series of youth forums aims to provide a platform for young people from all over the world to bring ideas and recommendations about the global goal on adaptation. But the most important is what can we do together? It is an invitation to all of you to continue engaging at the local level, to also discuss with your governments and to invite local communities to implement adaptation solutions. The next forum will take place on the 30th of May, and all of you are invited. Remember that these ideas and recommendations will be compiled and will be presented to decision makers, including to the GCA meeting in September and also to the next COP that will be hosted by Egypt in November. Then thank you to everyone for these inspiring reflections, and also I hope these youth-led solutions will inspire many of you to take adaptation action. Thank you very much to all of you, and before that we finish, I want to invite everyone to turn on the camera and let's take a family photo. The recommendations of these forums will be available on the GCA website, including the link to the recording. Also, the conclusions will be available in a publication and as well as part of a live infographic and illustration that will be shared with all of you. I see that some of you don't have yet the camera on. Looks fantastic. We are waiting for some of the participants that turn on the camera. And also special thanks to the team of the Global Center on Adaptation, to our colleagues Celine, Ife, and the members of the Youth Advisory Panel for making this youth forum possible. Then continue 1, 2, and 3. My colleague Ife will just call for the photo.
1, 2, 3. Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and wish you a very happy day. Thank you.